Another day, another game that is going to follow an interesting pattern of sequels. One of the main things you're going to notice over the course of this series, well, besides me telling the YouTube auditor to go fuck himself sideways, is the progression of sequels and trilogies. Little Big Planet seemingly follows that logic as well of how sequels generally go bigger in scale and scope on the second game. Now, before I even begin, you'll notice once again, I'm trying to remember how to play this damn game in the background. Like any platforming game, there's a certain puzzle that you need to figure out in order to pass Little Big Planet levels. You know, this shit isn't as simple as running across a map, jumping over some shit like Mario, shooting like Mega Man, or grabbing and swinging vines like motherfucking Pitfall from back in the day. Oh man, y'all remember that joint? Anyways, man, get back on topic. I just had like a flashback moment right there. Little Big Planet throws all kinds of platforming puzzles and elements at you in order to finish each level. None of these puzzles are overly difficult, but you need to think about that shit for a minute. You need to actually come up with an approach to passing each level. So a lot of this time when you actually play these levels, you have to figure out, what is it I have to do to keep advancing in this game? Sometimes you need to hit a certain switch. Sometimes you need to hold on to something for dear life as you pass over some fucking fire joints or whatever the fuck. And to see in the background, playing the game in co-op doesn't make this shit any easier. Sometimes you end up with one player being off the screen for too long, so it actually becomes more difficult to play the game the more players you actually have in the room on this. But anyways, getting back to the point on sequels, when it comes to video games, a general rule of thumb has been the first game in a new series comes out with a basic entry to the series. Then, with the sequel, they go all out on ideas, and you can tell almost every genre of video game. You can see that with virtually every sequel. Usually, they do better than the predecessor. Of course, there are some exceptions to the rule, and we'll talk about those in a minute, but just look at the number of big franchises that improved upon their opening entry. Uncharted was a damn good game, but Uncharted 2 blows it out of the water as an amazing game. Assassin's Creed was an average game. Brilliant idea, but only average in execution. But Assassin's Creed 2 was an amazing game that took all the criticism from the first game and improved upon it in the second game. Halo 1, great game. Then Halo 2 came along and created something grander and better. Other series that I already mentioned so far have been like Killzone, where they improved on their sequel from Killzone 2 to Killzone 1. Resistance went much bigger in their sequel to critical acclaim, and Half-Life, of course, has to be added to the conversation of games that improve upon their sequel. There are a few exceptions to this rule of thumb though, which of course, bigger isn't always better. The Modern Warfare series is a perfect example of that. Call of Duty 4 was excellent. Modern Warfare 2, not so much. But in general, after a new franchise is released, studios tend to listen to the critics and players about what went right, what went wrong, and what needs to be improved. Then, they go out and they make improvements on their next game. When Little Big Planet 2 was initially announced, people were all up in arms over this bullshit. The game was scheduled to be released 2 years after the first game, which is pretty much the standard time for games these days. We all know that. But fans didn't want to hear that shit. Since Little Big Planet has a ton of user-created content, fans of the game felt like it was too soon to have all their content ignored once the new game was released. Because after all, when a new game as a series is released, how much support do you think the prior game actually receives? So naturally, people didn't like the idea that all their shit potentially was going to be forgotten just 2 years later, now that Media Molecule is releasing another game. Although the game ended up being delayed 2 months, it went from November 2010 release date to January 2011, Media Molecule promised a few things that you don't see in games of the time, or even today for that fucking matter. So Call of Duty, pay attention. Number 1, all of your DLC and a good portion of your user-created content would carry over to Little Big Planet 2. Now, think about this for a second and compare this to any single shooting game we see nowadays. Imagine buying DLC for Call of Duty, Gears of War, Battlefield, whatever the fuck you want to look at. Imagine getting map packs or gun camos, like, you know, the space pussy camo, whatever the fuck Ghost has. Skins for your characters, whatever the fuck, man. You pay for them on one game, and that's it. You can only use them on that one game. You can't take your Battlefield DLC over to the next game. You can't take your Rubber Ducky camo over to the next Call of Duty game. You have to play the old game to get your money's worth out of the new DLC, and then buy new content for the new game. Well, Little Big Planet said, fuck you to all the games out there with this mentality. All your DLC purchases from Little Big Planet carry over to Little Big Planet 2. So your skins, your backgrounds, your stickers, your colors, your outfits, etc., anything on your profile from the first game will now be in the second game. What company does that? What game makes that kind of deal with their players, especially with all this cosmetic shit, man? So my Solid Snake character skin from Metal Gear transfers over across both games. My Kratos skin from God of War carries over across both games. This is how you make your fan base happy. Little shit like this, where you don't have to pay double for the same shit. Where buying 2 games in the franchise doesn't mean it's all about price gouging and shit like that. Now, fans wanted to take this and ask for one step further. If I can carry shit over to the next game, why am I paying for the next game? Why not just roll out some DLC with new maps and new shit for Little Big Planet so that I don't have to go out and completely buy a new game? In other words, what is it about the sequel that makes it unique and not feel like Call of Duty or Madden that just updates a few things and feels exactly the same? This brings me to promise number 2 that Media Molecule made. This game was going to be something completely different with even more content. Now, stop me if you heard that line before from other game companies. Stop me if you heard franchises like Battlefield and Call of Duty make that claim, and failed games like Bulletstorm and Fuse pretending like they're doing something different to shooting genres. The difference is that Media Molecule actually did it. On top of the improved physics, levels, puzzles, artworks, and mechanics that the game had, now you have the ability to create entire Little Big Planet games. That's not hyperbole, that's not a line of bullshit. In Little Big Planet 1, you could create a level for players to download and attempt to beat on their own. In Little Big Planet 2, they upped the ante. Now, you could create entire games. Not a level, not a world. Entire games. Whole games that other players can play and download. And not only that, some of the most creative motherfuckers in the world with nothing but time on their hands managed to create some iconic games just using the Little Big Planet creator. Street Fighter was recreated. Final Fantasy VII was recreated. Half-Life was recreated. Even Mario levels were recreated. Little Big Planet didn't just make a fine campaign. It made a creation system that allowed you to make your own campaigns. How fucking amazing is that? To this day, people are still creating levels and games and worlds to the tune of over 10 million user-created levels and games so far. 10 million. Think about that for a second. Even if you didn't play the campaign in Little Big Planet 2, which was fantastic by the way, everyone should play that bullshit, you could still go out and play literally millions of levels that other players created just from the in-game tools. What game do you know of can boast of this? The campaigns themselves are not that different from sequel to sequel, although the sequel did add some extra bonus stages in varying degrees like races and puzzles and all that other shit. But the main improvement is the amount of user customization this game now promotes. This isn't a small leap for a game. This is a gigantic triple jump ahead of anything on the market. I don't care what game you enjoyed the most on this console generation. I don't care what game you consider the greatest game of this console generation. Last of Us, Super Mario Galaxy, Skyrim, Red Dead Redemption, Bioshock, Portal 2. No game created something as robust and well designed as Little Big Planet 2. None. Of all the games on the market, of all the games you could play, there is nothing that compares to the level of programming that went into this game. To give users a creation tool to build their own game, share the content, and mimic other historic games, that's in a category of its own. I wouldn't put Little Big Planet 2 in my top 5 favorite games of all time or top 5 best games to play, anything like that. But in terms of design, hands down, it is the best designed game in all of video games. There is no competitor close to what this game is capable of. There is no amount of customization in any game that can even scratch the surface of what Little Big Planet 2 is capable of doing. And as I mentioned in yesterday's video, the desire for part 3 of this series gets louder and louder each year. Media Molecule has done everything right with this series from day one. They created an amazing entry game with Little Big Planet 1. They topped and exceeded all expectations for Little Big Planet 2 and the amount of user content it offers, and yet they have not rushed out to make part 3 just to make money. They've allowed players enough time over the past few years to enjoy Little Big Planet 2 and all its glory. And one day, they're eventually going to roll out the next installment of this series now that fans really have an earning for it. The hype and expectation for the next game, Little Big Planet 3, is going to be through the roof. But I can say this, along with Naughty Dog, this is the only other Sony-owned studio I completely trust. That's it. Not even Sony Santa Monica after that God of War Ascension crap. Media Molecule has created a brilliant series, and I can only imagine the creativity they're going to have when they finally roll out Little Big Planet 3. That is a game I will surely get on day one because it's going to be worth it. If this company can produce 2 brilliant games in their first 2 tries, you can only imagine what the 3rd game in this series is going to look like. So for those of you looking for a great game on the next console generation, I will guarantee you Little Big Planet 3 will probably be one of the most amazing games that we actually get. But anyways, another week down, and I still have a shitload more to go in videos. The next week up in this series is going to include the best campaign for this console generation. If Little Big Planet 2 is the best design game, I can say the next video coming up is going to be the top campaign that was made for all the consoles. So anyway, as always, rate, comment, subscribe, and all that good shit, and I'll see you guys in the next video.